break the ice with that. And
Actually,
make myself
baptism.
calm. And baptism. I've been in recovery for a while, so the only way I know how to do public speaking is like from how it was, what it is, or how it was, what I did, and what it is now. So my name is Jacob Holden. I am 30 years of age. I was born and raised in Greenfield, Indiana. My life started off like most other people that I know. I was born into a family of me, my father, my brother, and my sister. But at a fast age of 4, my mom left, and that separated me, my brothers and sisters, and my dad came home to just me. From that start, my dad had a rough time raising me alone. We didn't have much, but he did the best he could to do what he had with what we needed. And there's many nights, many days that I remember that I was the only one eating, and he would be feeding me, you know. But through that time, he worked really hard to keep me active. He knew that there was something going on with me, sadness. It was usually because my mom, she was always pretending to be part of our life, but never actually show up. My dad kind of was bad about always reminding me of this calendar that he kept track of how many times my mom decided to not come. And it built a resentment with him and my mother, and it also built a big boundary between me and my mother. But through that time, my dad steadily, worked his way to doing the best he could. He put me in baseball. He was my coach for 16 years. He coached some of the guys that are here today. He was a great guy. He had a lot of energy, but he worked a lot. He was exhausted a lot. So sometimes, his irritation would come out, and it was kind of like yelling towards me. And I didn't know how to take that. I was really sensitive when I was young, not having my mother for some reason. And as I got to about age 9, I started, smoking weed and doing drugs with my buddy at his house. And didn't think nothing of it. My dad didn't really pay attention to anything of it because, like I said, he was working a lot. And that progressed pretty fast to I'd say I was about 14, I started using pills, and I was coming to a baseball practice, usually high most of the time, and my dad started noticing, and he didn't know how to cope with it either, so he enabled it in a sort of way, told me to be home instead of out and about because he didn't want me to get in trouble. But I obviously had already started a track record of being in trouble that he hadn't known yet. By the time of age 16, I was arrested for possession of marijuana. My record is pretty extensive, starts from 2009 to 2021. With drug addiction, mine progressed extremely fast, but at that time, my mother joined my life in an extremely negative way. She arrived in showing me how to use multiple drugs throughout my life. Some things that I possibly never knew about or experienced, but through her, I got to do a lot of negative activities and meet a lot of negative people. Most of my mother's friends were drug dealers, drug addicts, and that became kind of like what I believe was my safe place because I didn't want to deal with the problems at home that weren't even problems, but I didn't like being told what to do. So about 16, I was expelled from school for suspicion of marijuana. Suspicion of marijuana. And at that time, the Marine Corps was going around and doing like the pull-up stations at the schools and things like that. They took a somewhat interest in me because I was still coming to their PTs and doing like exercises with them, but I was still getting high. And they tried really hard to work with me to try to get me back in school. They pursued Mount Vernon High School with me. They denied me because of my record from my school. Also the fact that I never passed a single grade in my life. My dad pushed me on. I don't know if that was a thing that they could see when it got to my grades or whatnot. But at that time I also couldn't read either. I couldn't write really. I could do about math. But I stayed doing drugs and hanging out with the guys out on Post Road, their PT station, doing like football and softball stuff out in their field before they left. But when I turned 18, I was growing pot at my dad's house, and I was arrested for that, and other 2 counties already had some other charges on me for having drugs on me. and I went to prison for the first time. That was 2 weeks, supposedly, of me trying to actually sign up for the Marines. So I felt like that was just the worst turning point in my life ever, because I constantly felt like a failure. My dad, it was hard for me to get I'm proud out of him, because I felt like I wasn't doing everything right, because I wasn't. I was doing everything wrong all the time. I never listened. So after my first prison sentence, during that time I learned how to read and write. My mom was writing me letters in cursive that I couldn't read. So I had to have my bunkie teach me how. That was a humbling and an extremely embarrassing moment. My dad also couldn't really write or read either, so it was kind of like a mutual thing that me and him only got to talk on the phone. But it made a huge separation for me and my family, because like I said, we didn't have much. So like in there, you don't get a call all the time. If you don't have money, you ain't seeing or speaking to your family. And I also had a not a restraining order, but a keep away order from my father and I at the prison, because he was part of the case. So my dad would come and sit in the parking lot and would sign stuff to me through the windows every week. He would drive up to Pendleton, and I could see him out the window. And he would do that every week with my grandmother. And it meant a lot, he would put the money on my books when he could. And you'd think like these moments would have really like made me realize, especially at a young age, that I needed to get my stuff together. That was so far from it. As soon as I got out, all the old people I hung out with had already progressed to doing much more other things. So I immediately jumped on that bandwagon, because that's what I thought was cool. That I thought my family was all these negative people, and my dad was just a supporter no matter what. And I used and abused that for years. I was in and out, in and out, in and out of prison, jail. It was for 8 years span time. And during that time, I joined a prison gang because I believed that they were my family. In that time, I shot at people when I was out of prison. I've been shot at out of prison. In that time, I would hang out with certain drug dealers because of the skill traits that I had learned would get me the things that I needed. I would manipulate the situation. I almost got in a lot of trouble on Post Road because I got into a dispute with some homeless people and assaulted them with a crowbar. I was just living in an extremely life full of sin, and I didn't understand that sin at all. It was normal to me. During all that time, if I went to see my mom didn't care. She would welcome me in, hide me from the police. It'd be okay in her eyes. And it just made me stay away from the one person that was constantly trying to get me to do better. No matter what I did, my father constantly stayed present, trying to teach me better morals in my life. Well, about 3 years ago, after trying to commit suicide, I was shooting up shots of meth that either should have blew my heart up, or I guess I just assumed it'd blow my heart up and just never did. I started having these like moments of like, what am I doing in my life, right? And I wasn't for sure why I was having these moments, because all I looked at was my life was going to continue being what it is: criminal, drugs, sex, prostitutes, all that stuff. That was what I thought was fun, and that's what I thought it was going to stay as. And nobody in my life really pushed church towards me. Nobody in my life really pushed God towards me. Even when I would try to participate in AA and NA, those places do get people sober, but that isn't what was going to make me sober, because I needed something that was going to actually show me that there was a love that was greater than myself and the people around me. And I did not know yet that was God. And my father's love wasn't enough. I didn't know to the extent of what I needed yet. And I still continued on this path of constant drug use, right? All the way till I was arrested with a pistol and methamphetamines out in Fishers, Indiana. They frowned upon that highly, especially because I already had 9 convicted felonies. 22, I've been tried. Like I said, convicted at 10, and they were upright. They were ready to throw the book at me. And when I went to jail, I was in there for 2 weeks, and who was the first person to come to my rescue was obviously my father. My father bailed me out for $5,000, and I told the judge that I was going to go to rehab to get myself together. Well, I didn't even know if I believed that lie because I wasn't for sure. I just wanted to get out of jail because I was withdrawing from drugs. But surprisingly, when I got out, my dad, not that surprising, my dad was there to pick me up, and he already knew that I told the judge I was going to go to rehab. So we immediately went on a search for what rehab I was going to use. Well, we searched through several different ones, but we found one that was down in Henryville, Indiana. And it was this beautiful place out on 600 acres. I had to do a 28-day stint. I was not really prepared to do that. I didn't want to do that. I still was focused on the drugs. And at that time, I was really intermixed with this crazy group of people, right? And it was kind of like a weird, sinister cult-like group of people. And I didn't know really how to address it or come to it. And because the drugs had warped my mind so bad, I didn't know like what was going on. Like I felt like people were out to get me, but wasn't for sure. But then when it came down to, I ended up kidnapping a woman that was grouped with a group of people that actually tried to hold me hostage a few months prior, that I actually had to hold somebody with an axe at the neck to get out of the hotel on 21st and Post. When I got to this place, and see, where I scatter around, that's because of drug use, right? Because I don't understand where my timelines fit, and it kind of sucks. So I wanted to give an example of how looped my mind will get when I now get sober, because my mind is still healing. What people don't realize when you're coming off of drugs that's been so long, your mind has stretched so far that when you're coming back to reality, you really don't know where it sits, right? But once you start realizing it, it gets better. So when I got to this rehab, I was still really, really warped, thinking that people were out to get me, that people knew what I've done. But it was a calm place. It was a nice place, a beautiful place. I got to walk out in the woods. I got to experience people's different loves. I got to experience friendships that I never really expected to have. I met my therapist that I still have today. She didn't understand spirituality really. She's really scientific. But while I was there, I started feeling like I was having these spiritual awakenings. That's what they would call in recovery. And I felt drawn that God in my mind, which I wasn't for sure what that was at that moment, was telling me that if I didn't get my life together at that moment, that I wasn't. Well, I was prepared to go ahead and follow this thought that I thought was a meth-induced hallucination and run with it, which was a horrible conflicting fight through me, because the whole time, in 28 days, I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off, talking to my therapist about what I feel like I'm thinking, what I feel like I'm seeing out in the woods, what I feel like is going on. And she sat me down and was like, is it positive? I'm like, yeah, it's all good. She's like, then run with it. She's like, nothing could be wrong with anything that's positive going in your head. I was like, okay, all right, I'll go with that. And then a couple guys started sitting down and reading some of this extremely old book that this man had from his generation of generations Bible, right? And it had like these amazing stories in them of like fine descriptions of like events. And one of them had talking about Jacob's ladder. And it talks about how he had a monument at the top, but the church was actually at the base of the mountain. And it seemed like it was backwards, like you would think the church was at the top and not at the bottom. And it talked about how the ladder was actually a stone walk or a stone path that would lead Jacob into moments that he would have with God. And what was amazing is I was the only person that was allowed to visit the pond when I was there. My therapist believed that that was a place for me, that they needed to allow me to be at the pond. Well, I found out that that resort I went to was actually a Christian's ministry resort, and it's called Wooden Glen now. And they had this beautiful building at the top. Looks like an amazing resort, all this stuff, and then the pond at the base. Well, all my hallucinations were happening at the pond, the base of the hill. So reading that just like made me feel like this was it. God had to be it. I felt like my hallucinations went out the window. I started really focusing on what I was going to do, how I was going to get out of this rehab, how I was going to live my life a little better. After 5 days, I was able to talk to my dad, and I'm telling my dad these things, and my dad's heard it all. You know, he was tired of hearing it all. He was just like, Jake, just show people that you can do better. You can do better. We know you can do better. I was like, all right. I need to listen to him. So as soon as I got out of rehab, I thought I was going to do better. I tried to do better. I attempted to do better, but my mind was still extremely warped, and I went right back to those same people because I have not met godly people at all. The people I knew were not good people. So I immediately went back to a short-term use of drug use. I actually ended up fleeing state and going to a different state, experiencing different things because I believed since I was facing 15 years that I needed to live it up. And I was like, I'm just going to go out and do whatever I can. I'm going to see whatever I can. I had COVID paying me, so it was like, it made me feel like, oh, the government's even going to let me get high and go to prison. You know, it was weird thoughts. I had weird thoughts going through my head. But during that madness, I came back to Indiana because I had court dates going on. And I was slightly starting to feel extremely uncomfortable with those people that were crazy that was in that like cult-like issue. I went back to those people. Like I went around those people again, thinking that I was going to catch them doing what they were trying to do to me, that I was somehow going to manipulate the situation to where I was going to get back what I thought they were taking from me, when all I was doing was putting myself in that position, which I learned today now that was the devil keeping me right there where he wanted me.
Yep.
He could control me. He was the puppet master. He knew everything that I was doing.
Yep.
Well, during that madness, when I went to jail, I actually had somebody steal my truck and my service dog that I have. Well, I got my truck back because of these bad people I knew. I had them go get my dog and my truck back. I got out, I had my truck. Well, this random guy was walking down the road that I kind of knew, kind of didn't, and he needed a ride to somebody's place across town in Indianapolis. So I was like, yeah, I'll give you a ride. We'll go ahead. I knew we was going to get high. You know what I mean? It was all cool. So I drive him all the way across town. And when we get there, we're at a Denny's. And I'm sitting there in the truck. Dude gets out. And we're there because their buddy overdosed and died. We're celebrating doing drugs, right? And this woman comes out because she recognized my truck. And I wasn't going to stay there. And she's like, hey, are you Jacob? I'm like, yeah, well, they called me Jake at the time. Are you Jake? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, hey, I've actually met your dog. I've been in your truck. I'm like, well, how's that? And she tells me that she knew the people that stole my truck and all my other items. And she was like, why don't you come in? She's like, your dog's really nice. Why don't you come in and I'll feed you? I was like, okay. And at that time, I'm extremely malnourished. I'm like 140 pounds, 135 pounds, and I'm 170 now. So, I mean, there's a pretty big difference. So I went in and I sit down and take this kind gesture. I really don't eat because I'm too looped out of my mind. But this woman shows me a lot of kindness, a lot of grace, fills me in on a lot of stuff that my mind was so warped, I didn't know what was going on. She made me realize how like other things I was thinking were just completely out of the way. Well, she invited me back to her hotel room and all these other people. I go. She realizes I'm filthy. She's like, hey, would you like me to wash your clothes? I'm like, yeah, sure. She washed my clothes. She washes my dog. She feeds me again. She actually puts gas in my truck to send me to go see my father because that time I was feeling really bad because I had to talk to my dad, and I went to see my dad and hung out with him. Well, I enjoyed that camaraderie, that compassion this woman showed me so much. So I was a stranger that I went straight back out to the city. Even though there was drugs involved, that compassion is what led me, because when I got around this woman, I still wasn't really using drugs that much. And at the moment, I'm still thinking that 15 years is right over my head, right? Well, for some reason, this woman has a strong spirituality going on, right? And she starts showing me like these small little clips of, I can't really think of who he is, but he talks about how the woman's man's helper. It seems like he's degrading the woman at first, and then he realizes, he points out how much the woman actually is helping the man build to be a better man, and how them together is a completion. And it like made me feel like I had this spiritual connection with this woman, right? And an active addiction, most men and women that are together are usually kind of sexually active, and we weren't. So it just was like a strong tie that I felt with this person. And we spent every day together. You know, I helped her get all of her stuff back that she needed from these awkward people, and she pretty much just was a shoulder for me to hang out and feel lightweight normal with. Well, we decided to move into my buddy's camper that was in the city while I was still getting high. And at that time, I was really, really starting to get pushing it. Like I was starting to get back to shooting these shots of meth that I wanted to kill myself with. And I think she must have noticed, I don't know. But she showed me this one last video, was talking about if I ever like wanted to get better or whatnot. I'm not sure where it was leading. And it like made me really resonate and think. And what's crazy is I think it affected me so weird that we ended up having this awkward fight and I kicked her out. I didn't want her near me, right? I didn't want her around. Well, that next morning I woke up and told her I was going to rehab again. And I threw all my drugs out. I didn't use the last bit of my drugs. And I immediately got in my truck, went and seen my dad at his work. He's crying because he's seeing me. I tell him I'm going back to rehab, right? And he's like, yeah, I think you should do that, son. I think you should do that. And he didn't believe me I was going to go, but I drove my truck all the way back out to Henryville, Indiana with the last bit of gas I had. And I went in there. I walked right in. They all knew me because they liked my energy. They liked me the first time. They believed in me the first time. And this whole time, the lady that runs that place been calling my dad, asking me where I'm at, what's going on with me, why haven't I been back, why ain't I connected with them? And as soon as I walked in, they were open armed. They showed me so much love. They cleaned me up. They immediately got me signed up. My insurance is already paid for this one time. They paid for almost 3/4 of my stay for me to get sober. They did it, not my insurance, because my insurance wouldn't cover it more. They paid for all the medications. They paid for all my food. They paid for all my housing. And it was amazing. And I started having all these spiritual experiences again. I was feeling like I was loved. I was feeling like I realized all these negative people I was around. This old man was coming up to me, kept telling me every morning that he wanted to pray with me, that I was shining real bright and all this weird stuff. And he was making me feel awkward, but I liked it. You know what I mean? I really liked it. You know? I was like, yeah, words of affirmation is my love language. Tell me more, you know? And then it started getting kind of weird, you know? These guys that were there, you know, I was really active, and somebody on meth usually real high energy, you know what I mean? And even when you come off, you either really high still or you go really low. Well, I'm really high all the time. And I'm like talking to all these people, socializing with all these people. Well, they start coming up to me and telling me they're having dreams about me, saying that I helped them in a dream where I pulled them away, got them sober. And this one dude tells me he wanted to pet me because I had a lion on my neck, because he was the same guy that had that Bible the first time I was in rehab, right? He was like, look, my wife told me one day I was going to meet somebody, and something to do with petting a lion's mane, and he seen a lion on my neck, and I was like, okay, this is kind of weird, but you can tap my shoulder, you know what I mean? And that's really a true serious moment, and it was awkward, you know? But I wasn't used to anything like this, so I knew that, like, all this positivity, I was on to something, right? Because at that time, even though I didn't know God, it was it, I was like, well, if I put good out, good comes. So if I'm gonna keep doing all this positive movement, energy, and everything's gonna work out. Well, my therapist asked me to write an autobiography. I wrote an autobiography. It was like 24 pages. She looked at me and told me she knew I was lying in it, right? She said some of it was true, but she's like, you're obviously delusional with some of this stuff, because nothing was credited to me or what I've done wrong. You know what I mean? It's everybody that's done something to me. And I realized right then that I had to really focus on the inner self. I really needed to dig deep. And the only thing I could think of that made you really think deep was the Bible. So I started reading in the Bible while I was in rehab. Started looking at all these scriptures. And if your name is in the Bible, when you start reading scripture and your name's in the sentence, you feel it. Like, you're like, oh yeah, that's right. That's speaking right to my heart, cool. Right? That might be a delusional thing, but if it works out, it's okay, right? Even today, if I see something on my phone, I'm like, that's speaking to me. Well, it's just Jacob. Jacob did big things, you know? So once that stint reached, which I forgot to tell you, my woman ended up being there 2 days after I got there. We were the only relationship that was ever allowed to stay in the rehab together. They let us join together. They let us sit on the hill together. My dog was our secret messenger. I would tie notes to his harness, and he would run over there and give her messages, and she would run back and give me messages. And there was moments where I thought she was going to leave, and I felt that spiritual connection was so strong that I almost left twice. I told him, I packed my stuff up, I went out to the street, and I was like, I'm out of here. And they're like, why? I'm like, she's leaving. She's like, well, don't let her leave. I'm like, no, I can't do that. They're like, why? I'm like, because God put her in my life. Woo. And right then I started realizing, I'm like, oh man, this is bigger than me just feeling in an awkward way. I really started thinking God was it. Well, she started writing me these letters that like she believed that she'd been praying for me, right? So I took all that real serious and real to heart. And when I got out of rehab, I waited for her to get out because she got there 2 days after me. And I immediately went and pawned one of my tools so we could go on this cool little adventure at a camping site. And we spent a night together, and we just talked about how well our life was just in 28 days, right? Some guy there offered to pay her car payment while we was there because her mother told him that he was going to meet a man named Jacob. Another weird experience, right? I still connect to that dude today. And his mother even called me today also and says that he still talks about simple things that I conversated with him at the rehab. So those connections were real, genuine, and I know God was part of it. So after our stay at the campground, me and Brooke got up, left. I'm still getting paid on COVID because I caught an injury when I was in the union, so they were like paying me actually really good, more than I make now. But yeah, they was paying me really good. Sorry if that's your tax money. I'm paying taxes too now. But I was able to buy a camper with that money. Right? I still have that camper today. I'm gonna go hunting in it today. But sorry again. But we stayed in this camper, and we worked with each other on getting our life together. My dad really liked her because right before we moved into the camper, my dad even let her stay there. My dad never let any woman stay at my house, ever. It wasn't a thing. He'd come in and kick him right out of bed. Get up, move, leave. Because he knew I obviously could not take care of a child, and he wasn't going to take care of another one either. I mean, he had a hard enough time with me, obviously. I mean, I was constantly giving him a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, that I should have never given him. So during that time, we started going to Brandywine Church. It's been a church that she knew Celebrate Recovery was in, and we went to that a couple times. A couple people here I know from there, so it's always a familiar face. I love Fight Club because that's a fight church that got me in it. We went to it was like our second service, I think, and Josh Stanford was there promoting Fight Club. And I knew I needed to do something immediately, right? Because if I get stagnant in my recovery, I was going to go downhill. And I didn't believe in AA and NA. I didn't want it. It wasn't helping me. I called myself an addict every day, and that destroyed me, because I needed to be in those programs like that, but not to degrade myself all the time, Even when I called myself a recovering addict, people didn't like that, which didn't make sense to me. Josh Stanford invited me to Fight Club. I was really gung-ho at first, and Brooke knew I was kind of nervous because I was like, I don't know what I'm getting into. I don't know nothing about the Word other than what I've been reading just recently. I don't know how to pray. I wasn't saved. I didn't know anything. I was just like, all right, sure, why not? I'll jump in. And kickoff was on my birthday, so how could I say no, right? And through that time, Josh and the guys that were in the program at the time showed tremendous interest in me. So much interest that it bothered me because I didn't know how to handle it. I was so used to the mindset of I wasn't good enough. I was a failure. I shouldn't be in church because those people aren't like me. I didn't even really understand Celebrate Recovery yet, that was a church recovering program. So I felt so out of place and so lost. I didn't understand what God did with people yet. And during that time, I was still facing these 15 years, and I had several court dates. Well, they have this awesome app that was called Mighty Networks, and they let me pour all my stuff out on there all the time. And I got tons of feedback from it, tons of prayers, tons of uplifting. And this whole time I'm having this woman fall in love with me that I'm falling in love with also, that I'm potentially going to leave, And that was extremely selfish of me, but I didn't look at it that way. I was just looking at it still with a warped mind that, we're living it up. I'm used to people leaving me, so it's was she really loving me? And as the court dates went on, Fight Club brothers supported me, and I got stronger in my faith, stronger in my health. stronger in my thoughts. Certain court dates, men showed up and prayed with me, several of them. One of them, my dad swears that God was there because he was a man from Fight Club that none of us knew. I still have not figured out who he was since then. He was just an older man that was bald with glasses that was from 2 hours away and somehow knew I had a court date that day, and he prayed with us, and my dad swears that was God in the courtroom. And so the judge pretty much just rained me with, like, congratulations for doing everything I did, right? Well, I was facing a trial. I didn't want a plea agreement. I was going to go in there and I was going to argue my case of me being sober now and that God had saved me. God was with me. Because that same year I got saved right out there. It was October 23rd of 2021, right after hearing one of the greatest Psalms moments of throwing a chair I've ever heard. You know, Jeff Larkin, he helped me that day. He told me that he knew somebody that was a meth addict that changed his life because of God and that he was flourishing. And I was like, man, this has to be true. You know what I mean? I was like, there's no way it's a lie. And it was a great experience. But right after that, I had to go to trial. I was extremely nervous. I didn't know what to do. Those same guys showed up with me. And my dad had been facing, he was getting sick and nobody knew yet. And my dad was showing up and, you know, it really helped him. My dad's been a big supporter of Fight Club the whole time because he'd never seen me actually act right or stay sober or do anything rightly that should have been worth doing as a child or man. And, you know, I know it made him proud because he got to see the morals that he actually was teaching me when I was a kid. That I was not letting him know that he had been teaching me because I was too stubborn. I was just a little brat, you know. But at that trial, the guys stood up and talked on me. And these guys, some of them didn't even know. Matt Zappazzotti barely knew me. And got up there and explained what the program is, what he thought about me. And like I said, my love language, word of affirmation. So these guys up there, it just was proof that God was in the room with me. He was helping me. He was walking me through it. And the judge let 3 of them talk on my behalf on what I was doing, what they thought of me, and pretty much what my case was going to fall on was what these guys had to say. Because most of the time what I had to say in the court did not matter. It don't matter what I said. If I was right, I was wrong. And I truly believe God spoke through them guys because the judge by the end of that day sentenced me to 5 years out of 15. I got 3 years incarcerated, 2 years probation. He also gave me an extra day before I had to go in to spend time with my family. And it was the judge's birthday that day. That was crazy. Yeah, they was having like a little birthday cake party, everything. It was the weirdest court day I've ever been in. You know, I'm used to getting horrible news, right? And but the thing is, I was so excited about that because I was prepared to be saved and a believer of Christ going to prison. And I was going to figure out what my mission was going to be in there. That was my goal. And that all changed right then and there. I knew that I was going to get a chance. And I knew I was going to get to show my dad. I knew I was going to get to hopefully show this woman that loved me and I loved her. And it was hard leaving her and my dad the next day. But she stayed with me the whole time of my incarceration. While I was in work release, I just continued to pour into guys that were obviously still pretty lost. And I was still very new, so, you know, everybody knew it was on fire. And some people stay on fire, right? But I was just on fire, man. I had to tell everybody about what was going on in life, how God did this. Because at first, everything it was I was doing. But when I realized it was God's doing, everything changed for me. Everything got more exciting. Everything was better in my life. And during these times, though, my dad got sick with cancer. And nobody knew. And I would just stay real positive, talking to everybody. And this through work release, I'm like, oh, it's okay. You know, my dad's pretty much lying to everybody. I'm like, it's all right. And everybody's wondering how I'm staying so positive and joyful. And I would tell them that it's because I know God has this. God has control. He's okay. And everybody's still pretty thrown off by this because I'm so new to this. They're like, I think they thought I was still delusional or if I was playing the system. I don't know what they thought yet. But I know that they probably didn't fully believe me yet. Well, during the time of work release, I had to go to another court date in Greenfield. Just like several stories, I wish I could think of it. I had it written down and I done forgot. Well, I got set back. I had to go back to jail while I was doing good, right? And I immediately started thinking about words in the Bible. Who was it? Job. Job was constantly getting things ripped from him, right? And he constantly stayed believing in God. So that's what I just thought about. Even though Job went through a lot worse than what I was going through, that's all I kept thinking about. I'm like, well, God, just stay with Job, even though everything was getting taken from him. So I was back in jail. Well, I stayed in the Word. I made a Bible study in my block. We started, singing and praising in the block. It was pretty cool. It was nice. I ain't never done that. Usually, I'm trying to be somebody I didn't want to be in jail, right? And that somehow got me into being the cook in the jail, right? So now I ain't even got to be in block with all these people. Now I get to be laying in this nice bed, cooking food for people. Well, I continued staying in the Word there. Well, all of a sudden I got offered this JIP class, Jail Intervention Program. So I jumped in that. Well, the judge I had did not like me in Greenfield. He pretty much told me that the judge in Noblesville was an idiot, that he should have never allowed me to have such a little sentence, told me I should have had the book thrown at me, humiliated me in court. Yes. And all I could think about was, it's okay. It's all right, no big deal. He sentenced me 10 months to do in there. Well, that JIP program was supposed to give me early release. I was supposed to go see that judge, and I did not expect to get out. By the grace of God, a sit-in judge was there. Sit-in judge released me immediately. He was astonished that the COs in the jail, these officers had wrote recommendation letters on my behalf, which had never happened. And these are the same guys that are buddies with the police that put me in the ER when I was a kid. Beat me down really bad, sent me to the ER for 2 weeks. Are now writing me recommendation letters on how well I'm doing. So I get out and I have to go right back to work release. Well, I'm in work release. We're doing a round fight club, and I'm trying to get guys involved in it. They're really not interested, but I'm telling all the COs about it. I'm spreading the word to all of them. I'm seeing if they're interested in it. You know what I mean? I'm thinking this is my mission, was work release going to have fight club. You know what I mean? And even though that ain't it yet, which still could be one day, you never know.
That's right.
It affected the people obviously in there. Because some of them people were willing to go to bat for me immediately on me getting out to go home.
Yeah.
And also during that time, I'm expressing to these people that I know my dad's sick. Nobody knows how sick, but we know he's sick. And some of the people didn't care, because when you're in the judicial system, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're doing good, doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. They don't care. They only care about what they're doing and their regiment, and it's ridiculous. Well, I get to meet a judge in Noblesville at a meeting, and this judge showed great compassion. I kind of peeked in some questions, because he'd asked about questions, and they were kind of offset about what he believed about how he could revive and help the people that are incarcerated. And he said that he believed that people incarcerated should have a second chance and should be able to do better if they are doing better. So I asked my conscience, help me get in contact with him about writing a recommendation letter on my behalf. He did it immediately. I mean, it was like 7 days. And all these COs are telling me that I was full of it until I brought a recommendation letter from the mayor of Noblesville stating that a 10-time convicted felon, constantly on drugs, had a pistol in their county, and was doing criminal activity in their county, should get released and go home. When we got to court, the judge had no questions. Not one bit. Same guy showed up for Fight Club that court day. With no question at all. Let me ride out. He didn't have no argument. He was like, yeah, sure, you're doing great. Go ahead. Go do what you need to do. Well, my dad didn't get to show up to that one because by that time he was extremely sick. And during that round, I felt like I constantly had a struggle through each round almost. But last round they had to deal with me, my dad being sick. And just a year before that, I'd have been already using drugs by now. That would have been traumatic enough. It'd been it, because my dad's been my rock my whole life. My dad was a perfect example of how I knew God could love me, unconditionally, no matter what. And that's also where I learned that, like, people in church, the Pharisees, like, there's a separation. Like, you have to just know the right people. You have to be around the right people to grow, to be better. Because there's people in our churches that also do not recognize where to reach out to help. And that's always been a struggle with me. And my dad also. So my dad wasn't saved yet, and he was getting sicker and sicker. Well, he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in most of his body. And he fought it for 1.5 years. And luckily, I was able to get released when I was in work release the last 4 weeks of my dad's life.
Love you, Jake.
The last 4 weeks of my dad's life, he was able to tell me he was proud of me. I was able to serve him in ways he served me. I was able to sleep next to him in his bed like he'd sleep next to me on my bed. You know, I was able to show him the love that God was showing me and the love that he showed me. And he was really big in Fight Club. This would have been his second round. He thought he was going to join when he was diagnosed, and he just couldn't. And my woman, she stayed through the whole thing, helped my dad while I was incarcerated. Well, we got to have the honor, me, Paul, Josh, my dad's best friend, to all save my dad right in his bedroom in his wheelchair. And praise God for that. You know, and right before that, he got to see me graduate high school. You know, it was all a good segment into his life to actually start a better life. You know, and if I didn't believe in God, I wouldn't know that my dad is constantly in my heart. You know, if I didn't believe in God, I wouldn't be constantly trying to do better in my life or for the people that are around me. If I didn't know God, I sure would not be here talking to you guys. You know, one thing I know about my life is that it's been an extreme hard struggle. Some has had harder, some has not. I just know that my dad's proud today, and just a few months ago, I got to also help baptize my mother-in-law, so that was awesome, you know. But I have a couple scriptures that came to mind when I was thinking today, because I had a lot of stuff written down, and that obviously goes out the window when you come here, right?
Come on.
It does.
So life verse, I've actually kept this for a long time, at about the same time where, you know, Josh reached out to me and told me that I needed to find my new name in Christ once you're saved. And my dad was a Leo. He told me to write things down, and like Lionheart was kind of the thing, you know what I mean? So I went with that. But during that time, I came across, James 12. Blessed is the one who preserves under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life, and that the Lord has promised to those who love him.
Come on.
Right? And then I got another one here. I got to figure out how to use my phone to even get to them. Romans 5:3-4. Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And then I'm going to leave off with one of the most important events I've had here, the Psalms 23, because that was my grandfather's thing, is, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He lead me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley in the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely the goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Amen.